I had achieved the American dream. Or, at least, the 21st century, I'm drowning in student debt, but can, somehow, afford a mortgage version of it. I was standing on my very own back patio, breathing in air that smelled of freshly cut grass instead of bus exhaust and questionable street food. Birds were chirping. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the stately oak tree that dominated the yard. For the first time in a decade, I couldn't hear a single car horn. It was a symphony of suburban bliss, and I, Leo Maxwell, was its conductor. I'd escaped the city. No more sirens at 3 a.m., no more alternate-side parking chess matches, no more neighbors having screaming matches about whose artisanal kombucha exploded in the hallway. I had a lawn, a 2-car garage, a mailbox with a jaunty little red flag. This was it, the quiet life. But I hadn't moved here for the quiet. Not really. I had a higher calling, a grander purpose. My gaze drifted from the perfectly manicured lawn to the concrete slab the previous owner had inexplicably installed in the middle of it. It was a blank canvas. And I was about to paint my masterpiece. In my mind's eye, it was already there, shimmering in the afternoon sun like a mirage of meaty perfection. A magnificent, custom-built brick and stainless steel outdoor kitchen, complete with a 6-burner grill, a sink, marble countertops for prep, and the crown jewel. A dual-chamber smoker big enough to handle 3 whole briskets and a pork shoulder simultaneously. It was a monument to slow-cooked meats, a temple of smoke and fire. I had already christened it the Prometheus Pit. It was the entire reason I'd chosen this house over 3 others. This yard, this patio, this very spot. It had the perfect acoustics for the sizzle of a well-marbled ribeye. What could possibly go wrong? I turned to head back inside, a goofy grin plastered on my face, and saw it. Sitting on my welcome mat was a wicker basket filled with sad-looking muffins and a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider. Tucked beside it, bound in a pristine white 3-ring binder, was a tome thick enough to stop a bullet. The cover read, in an elegant, soulless font, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. My grin faltered. I'd known there was an HOA, of course. My realtor had breezed past it, calling it a formality. They just make sure nobody paints their house purple or leaves a car on blocks in the front yard, she'd said with a wave of her hand. I picked up the binder. It had the heft of a phone book for a medium-sized city. I flipped it open to a random page. Rule 87. B. All garden gnomes must be of a classical, non-whimsical design and face magnetic north to maintain neighborhood navigational harmony. I blinked. Navigational harmony? Were people using garden gnomes to triangulate their position? I flipped again. Rule 112.d, subsection 4. All outdoor refuse receptacles, henceforth garbage cans, must be removed from the curb no later than 60 minutes after municipal collection has concluded. A delay of 61 to 90 minutes shall incur a Class 1 warning. A delay exceeding 90 minutes shall be grounds for a Class 2 citation and a monetary fine of $25. This wasn't a rule book. It was a declaration of war against joy. 300 pages of what you couldn't do. I was pretty sure spontaneous happiness was listed as a Class B misdemeanor, somewhere between having a satellite dish visible from the street and using a brand of fertilizer not on the pre-approved list. A movement across the street caught my eye. A woman, probably in her late 60s, was kneeling on her neighbor's lawn. She was dressed in a pastel pink tracksuit, her hair a perfect silver helmet that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. In her hand was a tape measure. She was meticulously measuring the height of a rose bush, her lips pursed in concentration. She made a note on a clipboard, stood up, and surveyed the street with the stern, proprietary air of a warden inspecting the prison yard. Her eyes scanned my house, and even from 50 yards away, I felt like my shirt wasn't tucked in properly. This, I thought with a sinking heart, had to be the author of my misery. The Grand Inquisitor of the Garden Gnome Tribunal. She hadn't seen me, but I saw her. A shiver of comical dread ran down my spine. She looked like a disapproving falcon that had just spotted a mouse wearing a loud shirt. I retreated back inside, the heavy binder clutched in my hand like an unholy text. The glorious vision of the Prometheus pit was still in my head, but now it had a shadowy figure hovering over it, holding a clipboard and a tape measure. The quiet life, it seemed, was going to be a lot more complicated than I'd thought. For the next week, I lived and breathed the HOA Bible. I read it cover to cover, my highlighter running dry as I marked every arcane rule about structures, landscaping, and, most importantly, outdoor cooking installations. The language was a masterwork of bureaucratic obfuscation. It danced around specifics, favoring vague phrases like harmonious design, aesthetically congruous materials, and modest in scale and ambition. It was designed not to provide clarity, but to provide ammunition for a subjective veto. But I was a software engineer. My entire career was built on finding logic in convoluted systems and exploiting loopholes in poorly written code. This rulebook was just the world's most boring legacy system, and I was determined to hack it. I spent a weekend drafting a formal proposal for the Prometheus pit. It was a thing of beauty. I included professional architectural renderings, a complete list of materials, all tastefully neutral bricks and stone, noise and smoke abatement plans, and even a soil impact report. I cited specific passages from the covenants that my project adhered to. It was airtight. It was respectful. It was, I thought, completely undeniable. The next step was finding a contractor. A quick search led me to Gus's Masonry and Outdoor Living. His reviews were stellar, with one caveat repeated over and over. He's the best, but he's not cheap. Perfect. I wasn't looking for cheap, I was looking for an artist. Gus turned out to be a grizzled, 60-something man with a sun-beaten face and hands like catcher's mitts. He looked like he'd been built out of the same bricks and mortar he worked with. He rolled up to my house in a dusty Ford F-250 that looked like it had personally survived a minor war. He walked onto my back patio, took one look at my blueprints, and let out a low whistle. "Well, damn, kid," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "This is a work of art, a real beauty. You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious," I said. "It's my life's ambition." He tapped the detailed drawing of the smoker. "The Prometheus pit, huh? Stealing fire from the gods. I like it." He squinted at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You got HOA approval for this." "Submitting the proposal this week," I said confidently. "I followed all the setback and material guidelines in the covenant." Gus let out a slow, wheezing laugh that turned into a hacking cough. He pulled a crumpled handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his mouth. "Guidelines," he chuckled, the word rattling in his chest. "That's cute. Real cute. You met Brenda yet?" "The falcon in the pink tracksuit? I've had the pleasure of observing her from a distance." "That's the one. Brenda Lancaster, retired head of county zoning permits. This little neighborhood is her retirement project," Gus explained, his good humor evaporating. "She doesn't care about guidelines, kid. She cares about whether the color of your mortar maintains the ethereal morning mist aesthetic of the community." I stared at him. "She actually said that?" "To a guy who wanted to build a doghouse," Gus confirmed, his face grim. "A beige doghouse. She told him the shade of beige he picked was too assertive." My confidence began to leak away, replaced by a growing sense of foreboding. Still, I had my meticulously prepared proposal. Logic had to prevail, right? The HOA meeting was held 2 weeks later in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled of burnt coffee and quiet desperation. About 15 residents were scattered around folding tables, looking profoundly bored. At the front of the room, at a long table, sat the 3 members of the Architectural Review Committee. 2 were nondescript men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. And in the center, a queen on her throne, was Brenda Lancaster. She was even more formidable up close. Everything about her was sharp and severe, from her angular haircut to the crisp crease in her khaki slacks. She called the meeting to order with a rap of her gavel that sounded like a gunshot. When it was my turn, I walked to the front, my heart pounding a little faster than I'd like to admit. I presented my project with the calm, logical demeanor of a programmer debugging code. I walked them through the blueprints, highlighted the premium materials, and pointed out my adherence to every relevant rule in the binder. I finished, feeling like I'd just aced a final exam. Brenda smiled, a thin, bloodless smile. "Thank you for that. Comprehensive presentation, Mr. Maxwell." She picked up my proposal, holding it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a soiled napkin. "While I appreciate the thoroughness of your application," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "the committee has several significant concerns. First, the scale. While it technically adheres to the 15-foot setback rule, the overall visual mass of the structure is simply out of character with the modest sensibilities of whispering pines." "Visual mass? What was that? Was she going to weigh my patio?" "Furthermore," she continued, warming to her subject, "the inclusion of a secondary sink constitutes a redundant plumbing fixture under Bylaw 28, which is intended to discourage the creation of secondary habitable dwellings on a single lot." "It's a sink, Brenda," I blurted out, unable to help myself. "For washing vegetables. I'm not planning on renting out my barbecue pit on Airbnb." A few neighbors chuckled. Brenda's eyes flashed with cold fire. "Please refrain from using my Christian name, Mr. Maxwell. We are not friends. We are a board and an applicant." She wasn't finished. She proceeded to surgically dismantle my dream piece by piece, using the most absurd, subjective logic I'd ever heard. The chimney was vertically aggressive. The stainless steel handles were overly contemporary. But her grand finale, her coup de grace, was the one that left me speechless. "Finally, and most importantly," she said, leaning into her microphone, "is the issue of odors. This facility is designed for heavy smoke production. The potential for excessive savory odors to drift into neighboring properties could create a public nuisance and infringe upon our residents' right to the peaceful enjoyment of their property, as guaranteed in Article 4, Section 2, excessive savory odors." She was trying to legislate the smell of my brisket. "So, for those reasons," she concluded, her smile returning, triumphant and predatory, "the committee votes to deny this application." She looked to her 2 cronies. They both nodded meekly. "The motion is denied." She banged the gavel. My dream was dead. I sat there for a moment, stunned into silence. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. I had been so naive. I thought I was dealing with a system of rules. I wasn't. I was dealing with a dictator. I gathered my blueprints and walked out of the beige room of doom, my face burning with a mixture of humiliation and fury. Gus was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against the hood of his truck, a knowing look on his face. "So," he said, not even a question. "Assertive beige?" "Excessive savory odors," I muttered, my voice hoarse. Gus actually winced. "Oof, that's a new one. She's getting creative." He reached into his truck's cab and pulled out a dented silver flask. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "You look like you need this more than I do." I took a long pull of the cheap, fiery whiskey. It burned all the way down, but it didn't burn half as hot as the rage simmering in my chest. This wasn't over. Brenda Lancaster had just made a very powerful, very petty, and very hungry enemy. The battle for the Prometheus pit had just begun. The next Saturday morning found Gus and me not on my patio, but in my garage, which we had converted into a makeshift war room. My rejected blueprints were taped to the wall, covered in red marker like a coach's losing game plan, spread out on a workbench, held open by a wrench and a heavy-duty stapler, was the HOA Bible. "All right," I said, pacing back and forth. She vetoed a permanent structure. She cited visual mass and redundant plumbing. She's using vague, subjective nonsense because the actual rules are on my side. Gus took a sip of his coffee, which was so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. "She's not playing chess, kid. She's just knocking the board over." "Right. So we need to stop playing chess," I said, a glimmer of an idea forming. "We need to change the game. What if it's not a permanent structure?" Gus raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You gonna build that thing out of Legos?" "No," I said, grabbing the binder and flipping through the pages frantically. "Listen to this. Article 9, Section 5. Mobile items, including but not limited to portable grills, wheeled tool chests, and movable recreational equipment, are not subject to architectural review provided they are not permanently affixed to the ground or dwelling." Gus stared at me for a moment. Then a slow grin spread across his leathery face. "You're a sick man, Leo." "She said the problem was visual mass," I continued, the plan coming together in a glorious rush of defiant inspiration. "She didn't say anything about visual mass with wheels." "So what's the play? We build the whole damn thing on a trailer?" "Better," I declared, pointing at the blueprint. "We build it on a custom heavy-duty welded steel frame. We put 6 industrial-grade lockable caster wheels under it. It's not a permanent outdoor kitchen. It's the world's most ambitious 2,000-pound brick-faced 6-burner portable grill, and it's 100% compliant with Article 9, Section 5. Gus started to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that shook his whole body. "Oh, she is going to lose her mind. Her actual God-given mind. I'm in. The spite surcharge is on the house." The war had moved into a new phase, guerrilla compliance. Brenda, of course, did not take this well. While Gus and his team began fabricating the steel chassis in his workshop off-site, she launched a campaign of petty harassment that would have impressed a KGB agent. The violation notices started appearing, tucked under my door handle like passive-aggressive love notes. The first was the garbage can infraction, complete with a time-stamped photo. Violation 112. D. Receptacle visible at 9:03 a.m. Fine, $25. I paid it. The next week, it was my garden hose. Violation 74. C. Hose not coiled in a perfectly concentric, non-elliptical fashion. Warning issued. I went out and bought a plastic hose reel. The pièce de résistance came on a sweltering afternoon in late August. I got home from work to find another notice taped to my door. Violation 91. F. Display of unapproved seasonal or holiday decorations. I stared at it, utterly baffled. My house was bare. There were no decorations. Then I saw it. In my front garden bed, nestled among some ferns, was a single, solar-powered, offensively pink plastic flamingo. I'd bought it on a whim months ago, a goofy, ironic nod to suburban kitsch. At night, its little solar panel made its eyes glow a faint, demonic red. I was staring at the notice, marveling at the sheer pettiness, when a police car pulled up to my curb. My heart sank. She didn't. Oh, she did. 2 officers got out. One was a man in his late 50s with a weary, hangdog expression and a mustache that seemed to be wilting in the heat. The other was a kid who couldn't have been more than 23, with a fresh haircut and an eager, earnest look on his face. Jaded vet and eager rookie. It was a movie poster come to life. The older one, whose name tag read Davis, ambled up my driveway with the energy of a man walking to his own execution. The rookie, Miller, followed a step behind, his hand hovering near his notepad. "Afternoon, sir," Davis sighed, stopping a few feet away from me. "We got a call about a disturbance." He paused, consulting his own notes with an air of profound disbelief. "A disturbance of the neighborhood's visual harmony." I held up the violation notice. "Let me guess. It's about the flamingo." Davis's eyes drifted to the pink bird, which stood proudly, one-legged, in the mulch. A long, painful sigh escaped his lips. "It's always something, isn't it? Last week it was a wind chime that was, and I quote, melodically aggressive." "The complainant," Miller chimed in, clicking his pen with officious intent, "alleges it's an unapproved holiday decoration." I gestured at the flamingo. "His name is Pinky, and what holiday precisely is he celebrating?" Miller looked momentarily stumped. The complainant did not specify." "Is there a National Flamingo Day I'm unaware of?" I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Because if so, I feel terrible for not getting him a cake." Davis shot me a look that was 1 part annoyance and 9 parts shared suffering. "Look, son," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "The dispatcher said the call came from a Brenda Lancaster. Let me see." He flipped a page in his notebook. "The 7th call we've had from this address in 3 months for a non-emergency. We've got real problems to deal with. There was a B&E over on Elm Street this morning. But when a citizen calls, we have to respond." "I understand, officer," I said, my anger at Brenda now mixed with a weird sort of pity for these guys. "So, what happens now? Are you taking Pinky in for questioning?" Miller, bless his earnest heart, started to say, "Well, sir, standard procedure," before Davis cut him off with a glare. "No," Davis said flatly. "What's going to happen is this. You are going to be a good neighbor, and you're going to take the bird inside. And I am going to go back to my car and write in my report that the situation was resolved peacefully. Then I'm going to spend the rest of my shift praying that nobody calls us about a garden gnome facing the wrong direction. Are we clear?" "Crystal," I said. As they walked back to their car, I heard Davis mutter to his partner, "See? This is what happens when people have too much damn time on their hands. Give me a good old-fashioned domestic dispute any day." I went over, plucked Pinky from the garden bed, and tucked him under my arm. As I walked back to my house, I saw a curtain twitch in Brenda's 2nd-story window across the street. I held Pinky up, gave him a little wave, and then walked inside. The game had escalated. Brenda was now wasting taxpayer money and involving law enforcement in her personal crusade. This was no longer just about a barbecue pit. It was about principle. I set Pinky down on my kitchen counter. His demonic red eyes seemed to glow with a newfound sense of purpose. We were in this together now. A week later, a large flatbed truck rumbled down the quiet suburban street of Whispering Pines. On its back was a monstrous tarp-covered object that looked vaguely like a lunar lander. The truck backed carefully into my driveway, and under Gus's expert direction, a heavy-duty crane gently lifted the chassis of the Prometheus pit off the truck and swung it over the side of my house, setting it down with a soft thud on the concrete slab in my backyard. It was glorious. The welded steel frame was painted a sleek, matte black. The 6 industrial caster wheels were chunky and formidable. It was less a grill and more a piece of beautiful, intimidating heavy machinery. The next phase began immediately. Gus and his 2-man crew, A pair of wiry guys named Marco and Luis got to work. We had erected a temporary fence, a tasteful HOA-approved shade of taupe, naturally, to shield the backyard from the street, but there was no hiding the sounds. The rhythmic thwack of trowels on mortar, the whine of a wet saw cutting through brick, the cheerful Spanglish banter of the crew. It was the symphony of construction. And to me, it was the most beautiful music in the world. To Brenda, it was apparently the sound of the apocalypse. Her campaign of harassment intensified. She couldn't legally stop the construction, as my wheeled loophole was ironclad, so she resorted to psychological warfare. I'd come home to find her standing on her own driveway, arms crossed, just staring at my house. She'd take pictures from her upstairs window with a camera that had a lens the size of a Pringles can. One morning I woke up to find my front lawn mysteriously swampy near the property line. She had accidentally left her sprinklers on all night, aimed directly at my yard. It was a war of attrition. She was trying to break my spirit with 1,000 tiny cuts. But every violation notice, every passive-aggressive glare, only strengthened my resolve. Every brick Marco and Luis laid was a brick in the fortress of my defiance. The tipping point came one evening about a week into the build. I was out front, grabbing my mail, when Brenda's garage door rolled open. She emerged, clipboard in hand, and marched across the street with the determined stride of a general reviewing her troops. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice tight and clipped. She didn't wait for a response. "I want to inform you that your project is generating noise in violation of the neighborhood's tranquility statutes." "Gus and his crew stop work at 5 p.m. sharp every day, Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That's well within the county ordinance for construction noise." "We are not talking about county ordinances," she sniffed. "We are talking about the spirit of the Whispering Pines community. The constant sawing and hammering is disruptive to the afternoon naps of several of our senior residents." "I'll be sure to tell them to use quieter hammers," I said dryly. Her eyes narrowed into slits. The mask of polite, bureaucratic concern dropped, and for a second, I saw the raw, unadulterated fury beneath. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, her voice a low whisper. "With your little loophole, your contraption. But some rules aren't written in a binder, Mr. Maxwell. They're about community safety, about order. When things get serious, when there's a real problem, people will look to me to make the right decisions. I have control over the things that really matter around here." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. It hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. "Are you threatening my brisket, Brenda?" I asked, trying to deflect with humor, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "Because that's a line you really don't want to cross." She just gave me a sort of knowing smile. "Just remember that," she said, before turning on her heel and marching back to her beige castle. "When the siren goes off, you'll be glad someone responsible is in charge." "The siren?" She meant the old civil defense siren mounted on a pole near the neighborhood entrance. It was a Cold War relic that the community still maintained for emergencies, like tornadoes or flash floods. I had no idea it was even still functional. Her words were strange and specific, and they echoed in my head long after she was gone. The conversation left me rattled. Her obsession was crossing a line from petty to genuinely unnerving. Later that night, I called my brother-in-law, Dave, mostly to vent, but also because he was the most level-headed person I knew. "Hey man, you got a minute?" I asked when he picked up. "For my favorite brother-in-law? I've got 2, he said. Dave was married to my sister, and he was one of those effortlessly competent people who made you feel like you should be doing more with your life. He was also, as it happened, the director of the county's Office of Emergency Services. I gave him the full rundown: the denied project, the wheeled loophole, the flamingo incident, and finally Brenda's weird, ominous threat at the mailbox. And then she said she's in charge of the things that really matter, and something about the emergency siren. I swear, Sarah was right. I think this woman is going to try and poison my dog." Dave was silent on the other end for a moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was less amused than I expected. "Okay, first, nobody is poisoning Oscar. But Leo, this lady Brenda, what was her last name?" "Lancaster. Why?" "Brenda Lancaster," Dave repeated slowly. "Oh man, I know that name. She was the head of county zoning for 30 years. An absolute nightmare. She held up the construction of a new fire station for 6 months because she didn't like the architectural vernacular of the garage doors." "That sounds about right," I muttered. "Listen to me," Dave said, his voice serious. "People like that, who spend their whole lives wielding bureaucratic power, they don't give it up easily. When they retire, they find a smaller pond, like an HOA, and try to be the biggest fish in it. They get addicted to the control." "So what should I do?" "Honestly, just be careful," Dave said. "Don't give her any legitimate reason to come after you. Keep your nose clean. Guys like her who get a taste of tiny power can be a real problem. The county doesn't need to get involved in a war over a barbecue pit." "Too late for that," I said, looking out my window at the skeletal frame of the Prometheus pit, silhouetted against the moonlight. "The war has already begun." The next few weeks passed in a tense, simmering stalemate. The Prometheus pit was nearing completion. The brickwork was done, the stainless steel grill was installed, and the heavy-duty smoker sat waiting for its inaugural brisket. It was, if I did say so myself, a masterpiece of suburban defiance. Brenda continued her Cold War, documenting my every move with her telephoto lens, but with no rules left to enforce, she was left to simply stew in her own impotent rage. Then, the weather turned. A heat wave had been baking the state for a week straight, turning the surrounding hills a dry, brittle brown. The air grew thick and heavy, and a hot, gusty wind began to blow in from the east. It was the kind of wind that put everyone on edge, the kind that felt like it was carrying bad news. The news, when it came, was on the TV. A wildfire had broken out in the Los Padres National Forest, about 30 miles east of us. At first, it was just another California news story, a distant problem for someone else. We saw the dramatic aerial shots of smoke plumes and the grim-faced firefighters on the evening news. But the winds were relentless, pushing the fire west, faster than anyone expected. By the next afternoon, the world had taken on a strange, apocalyptic hue. The sky, normally a brilliant blue, was a hazy, jaundiced orange. A fine layer of white ash, like a morbid snowfall, began to coat everything. Cars, lawns, the pristine countertops of my nearly finished Prometheus pit. The smell of smoke was no longer a distant threat. It was a constant, acrid presence in the back of your throat. A nervous energy settled over whispering pines. Neighbors who usually only communicated with a polite nod were now clustered on their driveways, talking in low, anxious tones, their faces tilted towards the eastern sky where a massive, churning cloud of brownish-gray smoke was visible on the horizon. The county issued a Level 1, Be Ready evacuation alert for our entire zip code. It wasn't an order to leave, but a stark warning. Pack a bag, gather your important documents, be prepared to go at a moment's notice. I did as they said, throwing some clothes, a laptop, and a shoebox full of photos and passports into a duffel bag. I made sure my dog, Oscar, had his leash and travel crate ready. The whole time, a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. The beautiful, peaceful suburb I had moved to suddenly felt fragile, like it was sitting on the edge of a knife. I was standing on my front porch, watching the eerie, smoke-filtered sunset, when I saw something that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was Brenda. She emerged from her house and marched down the street, not with her usual clipboard, but with a sense of grim, almost gleeful purpose. She wasn't looking at lawns or mailboxes. Her eyes were fixed on the small, unassuming concrete blockhouse at the entrance to the neighborhood. It was the manual override station for the community's emergency siren. I watched, half hidden by a pillar, as she pulled a key from her pocket, unlocked the heavy metal door, and slipped inside. The blockhouse was no bigger than a garden shed, windowless and severe. She was inside for no more than a minute. When she came out, she locked the door carefully, pocketed the key, and took a slow, deliberate look around the neighborhood. Her expression wasn't one of concern or fear. It was one of profound, unsettling satisfaction. It was the look of someone who had just hidden the last chess piece. A cold dread washed over me as her words from weeks ago came crashing back. When things get serious, people will look to me to make the right decisions. I have control over the things that really matter around here. When the siren goes off, you'll be glad someone responsible is in charge. My mind started racing, connecting the dots in a horrible, unbelievable pattern. The siren was the backup, the last resort. In a fast-moving fire, with cell towers potentially compromised or overloaded, that old, deafening siren was the one surefire way to alert everyone, especially the older, less tech-savvy residents, that it was time to get out. Now. And Brenda had the key. She had just been inside, and she had looked pleased. My God, she wouldn't. She couldn't possibly be that petty, that monstrous. To endanger the entire neighborhood, dozens of families just to prove a point? To hold our safety hostage in her pathetic little power struggle over my barbecue? The thought was insane. It was the plot of a bad movie. But then I looked across the street at her house, at the window where she had stood with her long lens camera, at the woman who had called the police over a plastic flamingo, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she absolutely would. The fire wasn't just a threat anymore. Brenda Lancaster had just turned it into a weapon, and it was aimed right at us. The next few hours were a masterclass in anxiety. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the windows. The orange sky deepened to a bruised blood red. The news reports grew more frantic. The fire had jumped a containment line. Embers, carried by the ferocious winds, were starting spot fires miles ahead of the main blaze. Our neighborhood, once on the edge of the warning zone, was now directly in the path of the fire's projected advance. Then, at 8:17 p.m., every phone in the house screamed in unison, the piercing, jarring tone of a mandatory evacuation order. The message on the screen was stark and terrifying. Immediate evacuation order for your area. A wildfire is approaching. Leave now. Go west. Do not delay. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I grabbed Oscar, clipped on his leash, and snatched the duffel bag by the door. Outside, the neighborhood was erupting into a scene of controlled chaos. Garage doors were flying open, car engines were starting. The air was filled with shouts, barking dogs, and the slam of car doors. But amidst the noise, there was a profound and terrifying silence. The silence of the siren. It should have been wailing, a deafening, unmistakable signal to every single person, whether they had a phone or not, that their lives were in immediate danger. But there was nothing. I ran out onto my lawn and saw old Mr. Henderson from 3 doors down. A man in his 80s who I knew for a fact still used a flip phone, watering his petunias. He looked up, confused by the sudden commotion. He hadn't gotten the alert. "Brenda!" I hissed, my blood running cold. Panic began to curdle the air. People were coming out of their houses, looking around, their faces etched with confusion. "Why isn't the siren on?" someone shouted. "Is this for real?" another asked. I didn't wait. I sprinted down the street, my feet pounding on the asphalt, Ash swirled around me like malevolent snowflakes. I reached the concrete blockhouse at the neighborhood entrance, and there she was. Brenda Lancaster was standing in front of the metal door, her arms crossed, a silhouette against the hellish red glow in the sky. She looked calm, triumphant. "Brenda, turn it on!" I yelled, my voice raw with adrenaline. "The evacuation order is mandatory. People don't know." A small group of neighbors had followed me, their faces pale with fear. "What's going on, Brenda?" One of them, a woman named Carol, pleaded. "My mother is hard of hearing. She didn't get the text. She needs the siren." Brenda ignored them. Her cold, reptilian eyes were fixed entirely on me. "I have the activation key," she said, her voice chillingly calm amidst the rising panic. "I will turn it on when you sign this." From the pocket of her sensible windbreaker, she produced a single, neatly folded piece of paper. Even in the dim, apocalyptic light, I could see the typed lines. "It's a legally binding agreement," she announced, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "An addendum to your property deed. You will agree to cease all construction immediately and to dismantle your monstrosity within 30 days. A wave of collective, stunned disbelief washed over the small crowd. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer, sociopathic audacity of what was happening. We were in the path of a raging wildfire. Lives were on the line, and she was trying to leverage it to win a fight over a barbecue pit. "Are you insane?" I screamed, taking a step toward her. "People's lives are in danger. You're holding the entire neighborhood hostage." "The safety and aesthetic integrity of this community are paramount," Brenda declared, her voice ringing with the self-righteous conviction of a true zealot. She was no longer just an HOA president. In her mind, she was a leader, making a hard choice for the greater good. My barbecue was a cancer, and this fire was the chemotherapy she needed to force its removal. I am making a difficult leadership decision. The sky flickered with a terrifying orange pulse as a section of the ridge to the east went up in flames. The roar was no longer distant. It was a hungry, angry beast, and it was getting closer. We were running out of time. I looked at Brenda's face, at the smug certainty in her eyes, and I knew that arguing, pleading, and reasoning were useless. She was in a world of her own, a world where the size of a chimney was more important than a human life. A switch flipped in my brain. The panic and rage receded, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard calm. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "You have 10 seconds to open that door and sound that siren, Brenda," I said, my voice low and steady. She actually smirked. "Or what, Mr. Maxwell? You'll build another grill?" "1," I said, unlocking my phone. "You have no authority here." 2, I tapped my favorites list. His name was at the top. "This is for the good of the community!" she shouted, her voice starting to sound a little shrill as she played to the horrified crowd. 3. I hit the call button and pressed the phone to my ear. It rang once. "Dave," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "It's Leo. I have a major situation at Whispering Pines. We're under mandatory evacuation, and a civilian is obstructing the emergency alert system. She's refusing to activate the siren." I paused, looking directly into Brenda's smug, arrogant eyes. "And she's holding the activation key hostage." I listened for a second, the sound of Dave's sharp, urgent questions on the other end drowned out by the wind. "Yes?" I said, my voice like ice. "It's her." Brenda was still monologuing, her voice rising in a crazed crescendo. "You see? This is what happens when one person's selfish desires are allowed to run rampant. This is about protecting our property values, our way of life." She didn't get to finish her thought. Two things happened at once. The first was the sound. It wasn't the deep, ominous wail of the evacuation siren. It was a different sound, a piercing, high-low shriek that cut through the chaos, the sound of a first responder parting traffic at high speed. The second was the sight. A pair of headlights tore around the corner, followed by the flash of red and blue lights. A black county SUV, the kind you see at major incident scenes, screeched to a halt on the asphalt, its tires spitting gravel. It stopped so close to Brenda she had to jump back. The driver's side door flew open, and a man stepped out into the hellish glow. It was my brother-in-law, Dave. But it wasn't the Dave I had beers with on weekends. This was Director Maxwell of the County Office of Emergency Services. He was wearing his full uniform, a navy blue jumpsuit with reflective stripes and official patches. His face, illuminated by the flashing lights, was a mask of cold, professional fury. He looked like he ate nails for breakfast and spit out fire code violations. Brenda stared at him, her rant cut short, her mouth hanging open in confusion. Who are you? This is private property. Dave ignored her completely. His eyes locked onto me, then scanned the silent siren house, then landed on Brenda with the force of a physical blow. He pointed a finger at her, a finger that seemed to crackle with the full, unbridled authority of the county government. I am the man who is about to have you arrested for reckless endangerment, obstruction of a government emergency order, felony menacing, and about 6 other charges I'm going to think of on the drive to the county jail, he said, his voice quiet but carrying more weight than a freight train. Give me the key. Now. The color drained from Brenda's face. The entire power fantasy, the carefully constructed world where she was the queen and this was her castle, evaporated in a single, brutal second. She was face to face with real power, and it terrified her. She just stood there, paralyzed, the key clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Just then, another car squealed up behind Dave's SUV. It was a patrol car. Out stepped Officer Davis and Officer Miller, their faces grim and streaked with soot. Davis took one look at the scene. The flashing lights, the furious-looking man in the uniform, the petrified woman, and me standing there with my phone still in my hand. And his jaw dropped. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, his voice a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "The flamingo lady." Dave didn't miss a beat. He jabbed his thumb towards a sputtering Brenda. "Officer, place this woman under arrest. She is actively interfering with a mandatory county evacuation order." Davis, who I suspect had been waiting his entire career for a moment this satisfying, strode forward. "Brenda Lancaster," he said, pulling out his handcuffs with a grim flourish. "You have the right to remain silent." Brenda finally snapped out of her stupor. "You can't do this. I am the president of the Homeowners Association." "Lady," Davis said, snapping one cuff around her wrist, "right now I wouldn't care if you were the Queen of England." Dave snatched the key from her unresisting hand, strode to the siren house, and unlocked the door. He reached inside, and a moment later, the world was consumed by sound. A deafening, soul-shaking, life-saving wail ripped through the air, rising and falling in a desperate, urgent cry. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A few weeks later, the world had returned to normal. Or a new normal, anyway. The fire, which had been named the Whispering Fire in a stroke of bitter irony, had been contained. It had scorched the hills right down to the edge of our development, stopping less than a quarter mile from our backyards. We were lucky. Brenda was not. She was facing a mountain of serious charges, and her name had become a local cautionary tale about power and pettiness run amok. The HOA, headless and humbled, was being completely restructured by a board of shell-shocked but deeply grateful residents. The story ends where it began, in my backyard. The Prometheus pit was finished, and it was a thing of breathtaking beauty. The brick was a warm terracotta, the stainless steel gleamed, and a plume of fragrant applewood smoke drifted lazily into the late afternoon sky. A massive, "We survived a wildfire and ousted a tyrant" party was in full swing. The yard was filled with my neighbors, no longer strangers, but friends bonded by fire and absurdity. Gus, my co-conspirator, was proudly manning the smoker, handing out slices of perfectly rendered brisket. Off to the side, enjoying paper plates loaded with food, were Officers Davis and Miller, both off-duty and in civilian clothes. Dave leaned against the railing of the patio, a cold beer in his hand, watching me pull a rack of ribs off the grill. "I swear, Leo, you attract trouble like a bug zapper," he said, shaking his head in amused disbelief. "You couldn't have just bought a normal Weber grill, could you?" I grinned, handing him a rib slathered in sauce. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, if I had, who would have saved us all from the Siren Lord of Whispering Pines?" I looked out at the scene, at the happy, laughing people, the kids chasing Oscar on the lawn, the setting sun painting the sky a peaceful, smoke-free orange. A real community had been forged here, not by covenants and restrictions, but by crisis and collaboration. I took a long sip of my beer, the magnificent scent of barbecue filling the air. Okay, I thought to myself. Now this is the American dream.